My uncle left his entire fortune to whoever could solve his riddle, so our family turned savage. Uncle Theo was the black sheep who made billions in tech while the rest of us struggled with middle-class lives. When he died at 47, childless and bitter, we expected nothing. He'd cut us off years ago after Dad tried borrowing money for his failed restaurant. The lawyer gathered us in Uncle Theo's mansion, a cold glass monument to his success. Mom clutched her purse like a shield. My cousin Brett smirked, already calculating his share. Aunt Carol brought a notebook, ready to document everything. The will was simple. One riddle. Winner takes everything. $847 million the mansion, the tech company shares. The rest of us get nothing. The riddle read, I built my fortune on what others discarded. Look where the forgotten gather, and you'll find what matters most. The answer sleeps where I first learned that broken things can be fixed. Brett laughed. That's it? Some cryptic garbage about broken things? The lawyer announced we had 30 days. The drive home was tense. When we got home, my parents immediately started arguing about strategy. Dad punched the kitchen wall, leaving a hole that seemed to symbolize everything breaking apart. That's when I realized how desperate we really were. Dad's business was failing. Mom's medical bills had drained their savings. This inheritance wasn't just money, it was survival. Within 48 hours, everything changed. Brett hired puzzle experts and rented a hotel room near the mansion. Aunt Carol started stalking Uncle Theo's old friends, demanding details about his childhood. My cousins began competing instead of collaborating, hoarding clues like jealous dragons. The worst was watching my parents transform. Dad became obsessed, spending 18-hour days researching Uncle Theo's past. Mom started following other family members, convinced they were hiding information. Then things got ugly. Someone broke into Uncle Theo's old apartment. 2 days later, Aunt Carol's car was vandalized. Every window smashed. The word cheater spray-painted across the hood. The family group chat became a battlefield. Brett claimed someone had stolen documents from his hotel room. Cousin Riley insisted her research files had been hacked. During a family meeting, I suggested we work together. The room erupted. Uncle Marcus accused Dad of hiding clues. Aunt Carol screamed that we were all backstabbing parasites. Brett threatened to hire security. That night, I found Mom crying in the kitchen, clutching Uncle Theo's photo from when they were kids. He was my little brother, she whispered. We used to fix broken toys together in Grandmother's garage. Now look what his money's doing to us. I realized we weren't just solving a riddle anymore. We were destroying each other for a fortune that might not even exist. The next morning, I discovered something that changed everything. Hidden in Uncle Theo's childhood bedroom, behind a loose floorboard, was... I couldn't fit what happens next in this short video, watch the rest down below. Part 2. Full story. Extended to a 95,000 characters male perspective. Hidden in Uncle Theo's childhood bedroom, behind a loose floorboard that creaked when you stepped on it, was a wooden box filled with old circuit boards, vintage computer chips, and a letter addressed to whoever finds this first, in Uncle Theo's distinctive handwriting. My hands shook as I unfolded the yellowed paper. As the only nephew who'd inherited Dad's mechanical aptitude, I recognized Uncle Theo's careful block letters, the same precise writing he'd used for circuit diagrams and technical notes since we were kids. The letter was dated 3 weeks before his death, written when he knew the cancer was winning. If you're reading this, I'm dead, and my family has probably gone insane fighting over my money. Good. I designed this riddle to expose who you really are. The fortune is real, but the real treasure isn't what you think. You've all spent 30 days showing me exactly why I cut you off years ago. My stomach dropped as I continued reading, each word feeling like a punch to the gut. Growing up, I'd been the one kid who understood Uncle Theo's obsession with electronics. While my cousins played video games or chased girls, I'd sit beside him in Grandmother's garage, watching him resurrect dead computers with surgical precision. Those afternoons had felt magical, a quiet sanctuary where broken things became whole again. I grew up watching Dad favor the successful kids while Mom enabled everyone's worst instincts. When I made my first million, suddenly everyone loved me. Christmas invitations appeared. Birthday calls resumed. When I needed emotional support after my diagnosis, when I was scared and alone in sterile hospital rooms, you all disappeared. Money was the only thing that ever mattered to any of you. The letter detailed his childhood spent in our grandmother's garage, fixing discarded electronics that neighbors threw away rather than repair. He'd learned programming by rebuilding old computers, selling refurbished devices to fund his first startup. While the rest of us focused on grades and popularity, Uncle Theo had been building his future from literal garbage, finding gold in what others considered worthless. I remembered those afternoons when I was 8 or 9, handing him tools while he explained how resistors worked, how circuit boards carried information like roads carrying cars. He'd been patient with my questions, never talking down to me the way other adults did. He'd show me how electricity flowed through copper traces, how damaged components could be bypassed or replaced, how seemingly dead machines could be brought back to life with knowledge and persistence. Looking back, those were probably the last genuine relationships he'd had with our family. Once his first company went public and the money started rolling in, everything changed. Family gatherings became networking opportunities. Casual conversations turned into investment pitches. Even birthday calls felt like disguised requests for loans or business advice. The broken things I fixed taught me more about value than any business school. Look where the forgotten gather. The place where I learned that broken doesn't mean worthless. The answer sleeps where I first learned that thrown away things could be treasured. My phone buzzed with increasing urgency. 17 missed calls from Mom, 8 from Dad, 12 threatening text messages from Brett demanding to know where I was. The family was fracturing in real time, and I was holding the evidence that would either save us or destroy us completely. I drove to grandmother's abandoned house across town, the garage where Uncle Theo had spent countless hours as a kid. The family had avoided this place since grandmother died 5 years ago. Too many memories, too much guilt about the nursing home we'd eventually moved her to when caring for her became inconvenient. Dad had always promised to clean out the garage, but somehow never found time between running his failing restaurant and dodging creditors. The garage was exactly as grandmother left it, a time capsule of grandfather's mechanical obsessions. Workbenches covered in dust, old tools hanging on pegboards like museum pieces, boxes of electronic parts stacked to the ceiling in precarious towers. This was where Uncle Theo had learned to see potential in discarded things, where he'd developed the skills that made him billions. The smell hit me immediately. Motor oil, metal polish, and that distinctive scent of old electronics. Grandmother used to joke that the garage smelled like the future, back when Uncle Theo was just a weird kid who preferred machines to people. Now I understood why he'd spent so much time here. It was the one place where his obsessions were appreciated instead of mocked. I searched for hours, moving boxes that hadn't been touched in decades, checking drawers filled with resistors and capacitors sorted by value, following the logic of the riddle through a maze of mechanical memories. My hands were black with dust and motor oil by the time I found it. Behind the tool cabinet where grandfather used to store motor oil, a hidden panel that opened when I pressed on a specific corner. The mechanism was elegant in its simplicity, exactly the kind of thing Uncle Theo would have designed. Inside was another letter and a flash drive that would change everything I thought I knew about Uncle Theo's plan. The flash drive contained Uncle Theo's real will, the one that mattered. The riddle was a test, but not for intelligence or puzzle-solving skills. It was a test of character, a final experiment in human nature conducted by a dying man who'd lost faith in his family, but still held onto a sliver of hope that someone might prove him wrong. Hidden cameras had been installed throughout the mansion, recording everything since the lawyer's reading. Uncle Theo had documented our descent into madness. The break-ins, the threats, the family meetings that turned into screaming matches, the private investigators following siblings, the complete moral bankruptcy of people fighting over money they'd never earned. As I watched the footage on my laptop, connecting to the garage's Wi-Fi that Uncle Theo had apparently maintained even after grandmother's death, I felt sick. There was Dad threatening to disown anyone who didn't share information, his face twisted with rage I'd never seen before. There was Mom following Aunt Carol's car like some desperate stalker, taking photos through her windshield. There was Brett screaming at his hired investigators, demanding they find dirt on family members, threatening lawsuits if they didn't produce results. We looked like animals fighting over carrion, and Uncle Theo had captured every ugly moment in high definition. The real will was devastating in its clarity. Uncle Theo had divided his fortune equally among local charities focused on helping discarded people, homeless shelters, addiction recovery centers, programs for aging out foster kids, organizations that saw value in what society threw away. The mansion would become a community center. The tech company would be sold, proceeds funding scholarships for kids from broken homes. But there was a provision that made my hands tremble as I read it. If any family member demonstrated genuine character during the 30-day period, if someone chose family over fortune, showed compassion over greed, tried to unite rather than divide, they would inherit everything instead. Uncle Theo had included specific criteria, as detailed as a legal contract, as precise as the engineering specifications he'd written for his tech company. The criteria were heartbreakingly specific, evidence of putting family unity above personal gain, showing compassion for others' struggles, refusing to participate in backstabbing and scheming, maintaining integrity under financial pressure. He'd even included a scoring system, rating different behaviors and assigning point values to various acts of character or selfishness. The letter continued, "I hope someone proves me wrong about our family. I hope someone remembers that broken things can be fixed, including relationships. I hope someone chooses love over money, unity over personal gain. But based on 47 years of observation, I doubt it. You've all shown me exactly who you are when the stakes are high enough." I sat in that dusty garage, surrounded by the ghosts of Uncle Theo's childhood, holding the proof that would destroy my family's dreams, and realized he was right about everything. We'd become exactly what he expected, savage, greedy, willing to destroy each other for money we'd never worked for. The cameras had captured everything, every ugly moment, every betrayal, every choice to prioritize greed over love. But as I read deeper into his files, I discovered something else. Uncle Theo had been documenting our family's dysfunction for years, not just the past 30 days. He had recordings of Christmas dinners where relatives pitched business ideas instead of catching up. He had emails where family members only contacted him when they needed money. He had voice messages from birthdays and holidays where the congratulations quickly turned into requests for loans or investments. The man had been conducting a longitudinal study of his own family, measuring our capacity for genuine love versus opportunistic greed. The riddle wasn't just a test. It was the final data point in a decades-long experiment that had probably broken his heart. My phone rang again. Mom, her voice desperate and shrill, barely holding on to sanity. "Where are you? Brett thinks you found something. He's threatening to hire investigators to follow you." Your cousin Riley changed all her passwords because she thinks we're trying to hack her files. This family is falling apart, and your father's talking about taking out another mortgage to hire better experts. I could hear Dad in the background shouting at someone on another phone, his voice hoarse from days of stress and sleepless nights. The man who'd taught me to work with my hands, to fix things instead of throwing them away, had become someone I barely recognized. I need to tell you something, I said, watching dust motes dance in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the garage's dirty windows. Did you solve it? Did you find the answer? Please tell me you solved it. Your father's been up for 72 hours straight. I think he's having some kind of breakdown. He's talking about selling the house, about borrowing money from loan sharks. I'm scared of what he might do. I looked at the hidden panel, the letters, the evidence of our family's complete moral collapse captured in high definition. Yeah, Mom, I solved it. The silence stretched until she whispered, "Thank God, we're saved. Your father can keep the business. I can get the surgery I need. We can finally stop worrying about money." But I wasn't sure salvation was what we deserved. The next morning, I called everyone to the mansion, using the same group text that had become a battlefield of accusations and paranoia. They arrived expecting celebration. I was the youngest adult male in the family, the one they'd all underestimated. Brett brought champagne and his wife wore a new dress, probably purchased on credit with the expectation of imminent wealth. Aunt Carol had already started planning renovations, clutching a folder full of contractor estimates and interior design magazines. Dad carried a briefcase full of investment plans he'd been developing for weeks, dreams of expanding his failing restaurant into an empire that would stretch across 3 states. Uncle Marcus showed up with his lawyer, ready to handle the legal paperwork for claiming our inheritance. Even my little sister had dressed up, probably imagining college tuition paid in full, maybe a new car, the kind of financial security our family had never known. The mansion felt different that morning, charged with expectation and greed in equal measure. Everyone was performing their version of dignity, trying to look worthy of Uncle Theo's fortune while secretly calculating their share of $847 million. I stood where the lawyer had read the original will and pulled out Uncle Theo's real letter. The room fell silent as I unfolded the papers that would determine all our futures. The riddle was about finding where broken things can be fixed, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. Uncle Theo spent his childhood in grandmother's garage, fixing discarded electronics that neighbors threw away. That's where he learned the skills that made him billions. That's where he discovered that broken doesn't mean worthless. That's where the real will was hidden. Excited murmurs filled the room. Dad was already calculating numbers, probably figuring out how much he could invest in expanding his restaurant. Mom was crying with relief, finally seeing an end to the medical bills that had been crushing them for years. Brett was texting his financial advisor, ready to start making moves with money he didn't have yet. I could see them mentally spending Uncle Theo's fortune, planning lives they thought his money would buy them. New houses, new cars, college funds, investments, vacations, all the things that middle-class families dream about when they imagine sudden wealth. But the riddle wasn't about finding money, I continued, watching their faces change as the implications sank in. It was about finding character. Uncle Theo recorded everything over the past 30 days. Every break-in, every threat, every moment we chose greed over family, money over morality. The room went silent except for the sound of Aunt Carol's pen dropping and hitting the marble floor with a sharp click that seemed to echo forever in the sudden vacuum of their shattered expectations. I pulled out the flash drive and laptop, connecting them to the mansion's big-screen TV. The technology felt appropriate, Uncle Theo using the same kind of electronics he'd learned to master as a child to expose the truth about his family's character. The first clip showed Brett screaming at his hired investigators in his hotel room, demanding they find dirt on family members. His face was red with rage, veins bulging in his forehead as he threatened to sue them if they didn't produce results within 24 hours. The audio was crystal clear, capturing every ugly word, every threat, every moment where money transformed him into someone his own children wouldn't recognize. The second showed Aunt Carol vandalizing Cousin Riley's car at 2 a.m., spray-painting cheater across the hood with the methodical precision of someone who'd planned every detail. She'd worn dark clothes and a ski mask, but Uncle Theo's cameras had infrared capability. Her movements were careful, deliberate, the work of someone who'd thought through every angle except the possibility that she was being watched. The third captured Dad hiring a private investigator to follow his own sister, handing over cash like some kind of criminal conspiracy. The meeting took place in a parking garage, complete with whispered conversations and manila envelopes full of money. Dad looked like a character from a crime movie, paranoid and desperate in ways that made my stomach turn. Uncle Theo's voice came through the speakers, a recording he'd made the week before dying, his voice weak but determined. I hoped someone would prove me wrong. I hoped someone would choose family over fortune, would remember that broken relationships can be fixed like broken circuits. I hoped someone would demonstrate the values grandmother tried to teach us in that garage. Patience, compassion, the belief that thrown-away things still have value. Faces around the room shifted from confusion to horror as they realized what they were watching. Brett's wife started crying, covering her face with her hands as she watched her husband become someone she'd never seen before. Aunt Carol's notebook fell from her shaking hands, the renovation plans scattering across the floor like fallen leaves. Dad's face went gray as he watched himself threatening to disown his own children, his voice cold and calculating in ways I'd never heard before. The money goes to charity, I announced, watching their dreams crumble in real time. All $847 million, the mansion becomes a community center. The tech company gets sold to fund scholarships. Uncle Theo's creating a foundation for discarded people, the homeless, the addicted, the forgotten. The silence was deafening. I could hear the mansion's expensive climate control system humming, the grandfather clock in the corner ticking away seconds that felt like hours. Outside, birds were singing, oblivious to the human drama unfolding in Uncle Theo's monument to success. Uncle Marcus stood up first, his face red with rage, the lawyer beside him already taking notes for what would probably be a futile legal challenge. This is fraud. We'll contest it. No court will uphold this manipulation. He was mentally ill, clearly not competent when he wrote this. The cancer had affected his judgment. Unless, I continued, reading directly from Uncle Theo's letter, someone in this room demonstrated genuine character during these 30 days. Hope flickered in their eyes like candle flames in a windstorm until I continued reading Uncle Theo's criteria. Genuine character meant choosing family over personal gain. It meant showing compassion when others showed greed. It meant being the person who tried to bring everyone together instead of tearing them apart. It meant putting moral principles above financial desperation. The criteria were specific and damning. No one could claim ignorance or misunderstanding. Uncle Theo had defined exactly what he was looking for. Evidence of someone putting family unity above personal gain, showing compassion for others' struggles, refusing to participate in the backstabbing and scheming that had consumed everyone else. He'd even created a point system, scoring different behaviors on a scale that revealed the mathematical precision of his disappointment. Acts of kindness earned positive points. Threats and manipulation earned negative points. The final scores were devastating in their objectivity. The room erupted in accusations and recriminations. Brett screamed that I'd manipulated them, that I'd known about the cameras all along, that I was some kind of mastermind who'd orchestrated their downfall for my own benefit. His voice cracked with rage and disbelief, unable to process that his own actions had condemned him. Aunt Carol accused me of conspiracy, claiming I'd worked with Uncle Theo to destroy the family for my own gain. She'd moved beyond anger into something approaching hysteria, her carefully controlled facade finally cracking under the weight of exposure. The woman who'd always prided herself on being rational and logical was now screaming about betrayal and manipulation. Dad demanded I contest the will, threatened to disown me if I didn't fight for what he called our rightful inheritance. The irony was lost on him, threatening to disown me for not helping him claim money from a man who'd already disowned all of us for our greed. I found this yesterday, I said calmly over their chaos, which gives me a choice. I looked around the room at these people I'd loved my entire life, now revealed as strangers willing to destroy everything for money they'd never earned. The transformation was complete. Whatever love and loyalty had once bound us together had been incinerated in the furnace of greed and desperation. I could claim the inheritance. According to Uncle Theo's criteria, I'm the only one who tried to keep us together. I suggested collaboration while you hired investigators. I comforted Mom while you plotted against each other. I never broke into anyone's property or threatened family members. The room fell silent as they realized I was right. In their desperation, they'd forgotten that someone had been watching, evaluating, measuring their actions against basic standards of human decency. Uncle Theo's cameras had captured everything, but more importantly, they'd captured the one person who'd tried to hold the family together instead of tearing it apart. Mom stepped forward, tears streaming down her face, mascara creating black tracks on her cheeks like war paint. Please, your father's business is failing. My medical bills are destroying us. We'll lose the house. We need this money to survive. Her desperation was real and heartbreaking. For a moment, I felt the weight of being able to save them, to solve all their problems with a simple decision. But Uncle Theo had anticipated this too, had probably known that guilt and family loyalty would be the final test. Uncle Theo included a provision for genuine need, I said, watching relief flood her face like sunrise after a long night. Medical expenses, legitimate business debts, real emergencies, those can be covered by the foundation he's creating, but only after investigation to ensure the need is real, not manufactured or exaggerated. Foundation? Aunt Carol's voice cracked like breaking glass. The Theo Morrison Foundation for Discarded People. Homeless shelters, addiction recovery, foster care programs. The mansion becomes a community center where forgotten people can learn job skills, get counseling, rebuild their lives from the electronic scraps of society. Brett's face turned purple, the veins in his forehead looking ready to burst like overpressured pipes. You're destroying our family for strangers, for homeless junkies and criminals, people who threw their lives away while we worked hard and played by the rules. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Brett couldn't see the irony, that we'd just spent 30 days throwing away our family relationships for money, while the homeless people he despised had often lost everything through circumstances beyond their control. Uncle Theo believed discarded people deserve second chances, I replied. Just like he gave discarded electronics second lives. Maybe he saw something in broken people that we missed. Potential instead of problems. Value instead of liability. The room erupted again, but this time the anger was different. Sharper, more personal, tinged with the kind of rage that comes from having your worst self exposed in high definition. Brett accused me of betraying my own blood for social justice virtue signaling. Dad demanded I contest the will and claim what was rightfully ours as Uncle Theo's only remaining family. Aunt Carol threatened lawsuits that would drag on for years. promising to destroy my reputation in the process. She'd already started calculating legal strategies, probably figuring out which judges might be sympathetic to a family defrauded by an eccentric billionaire's final manipulation. Uncle Marcus stormed out, slamming the door so hard a picture fell off the wall and shattered on the marble floor. The crash seemed to punctuate the end of something, not just our hopes for Uncle Theo's money, but our illusions about who we were as people, as a family. Through the chaos, I noticed Mom sitting quietly, staring at Uncle Theo's childhood photo on the mantel, the one that showed him at 8 years old, holding a broken radio he'd successfully repaired, his face bright with the joy of creation and discovery. "He used to sneak me extra cookies when I was sad," she whispered, her voice cutting through the arguments like a knife through paper. When Dad was angry about report cards or money, Uncle Theo would distract him by asking about his broken electronics. He was just a little boy, but he already knew how to fix things, how to make people feel better. She looked at me with clear eyes for the first time in weeks, as if seeing me instead of just a potential source of wealth. What kind of people have we become? What would Grandmother think if she could see us now? She taught us to help each other, to stick together no matter what. We've become exactly the kind of people she warned us about, people who love money more than family. That question hung in the air as the family slowly dispersed, their dreams of instant wealth crumbling like sandcastles hit by waves. Some threatened legal action they couldn't afford. Others just left in bitter silence, unable to process the magnitude of their moral failure and public humiliation. Brett's wife filed for divorce 2 weeks later, claiming she couldn't respect a man who'd threatened his own family over money. The court documents cited irreconcilable differences, but everyone knew the real reason. She'd seen who he really was when the stakes were high enough, and she didn't like what she discovered. 6 months later, the Theo Morrison Foundation was thriving beyond anyone's expectations. The mansion had been transformed from a cold monument to individual success into a warm community center, celebrating collective healing and second chances. The mansion hosted job training programs where homeless veterans learned construction skills in the same rooms where Uncle Theo had once eaten lonely dinners. Addiction recovery meetings filled the former dining room where we'd shared holiday meals, back when we still knew how to love each other. Community kitchens fed hundreds of people every week in the space where Uncle Theo had once sat alone, planning his revenge against a family that had forgotten how to care about anything except money. Uncle Theo's money was helping hundreds of people society had discarded, proving his point about the value of thrown-away things. Former addicts became peer counselors, sharing their stories of rock bottom and recovery with people just beginning their journey to sobriety. Homeless veterans taught job skills to younger men who'd lost their way, creating a cycle of mentorship and hope. The mansion buzzed with the sound of people rebuilding their lives from the wreckage of broken dreams. Computer repair classes in Grandmother's old garage, GED programs in Uncle Theo's former office, job interviews in the living room where we'd once fought over his fortune. Brett eventually apologized, his pride finally broken by the consequences of his greed and the public humiliation of the divorce proceedings. His puzzle experts had cost him his children's college funds, and the humility of financial ruin taught him lessons that prosperity never could. He started volunteering at the foundation's job training center, teaching construction skills to homeless veterans. The work was harder than anything he'd done in his corporate career, but more meaningful than any profit margin he'd ever achieved. Working alongside men who'd lost everything, homes, families, dignity, Brett discovered that rock bottom could be a foundation instead of a grave. He learned to listen instead of lecture, to help instead of judge. The transformation was slow and painful, but genuine. His own children, initially embarrassed by his public failure, eventually came to respect the man he became through service to others. Aunt Carol also found redemption through service, though her path was different and more circuitous. She started volunteering at the foundation's literacy program, discovering that helping others read was more fulfilling than reading investment portfolios or planning renovations she couldn't afford. Her marriage improved when she stopped obsessing over money and status, focusing instead on the relationships she'd neglected while chasing wealth and social position. She worked with single mothers trying to earn their GEDs, with elderly people who'd never learned to read properly, with immigrants struggling with English as a second language. Each small victory, a mother reading her child a bedtime story for the first time, a grandfather finally able to read his medication labels without help, an immigrant passing her citizenship test, felt more meaningful than any stock portfolio gain or real estate investment. Dad's business stabilized with a foundation loan designed for genuine entrepreneurs who serve their communities. The terms were fair but strict. He had to prove the business served the community, not just his ego. He had to hire locally, pay fair wages, contribute to the neighborhood's economic health rather than extracting wealth from it. The oversight was humbling for a man who'd always prized his independence and resented anyone questioning his business decisions. But it also provided structure and accountability that his chaotic management style had always lacked. The restaurant he'd always dreamed of finally opened, but not as the upscale establishment he'd originally planned. Instead, it became a community gathering place that hired people from the foundation's job training programs, served affordable meals that working families could actually afford, and created the kind of neighborhood hub Uncle Theo had probably envisioned. The success was modest but sustainable, built on relationships rather than profit margins. Dad learned to see his employees as people with stories and struggles instead of just labor costs to be minimized. The change in perspective transformed not just his business, but his relationship with the community he'd always claimed to serve. Mom's medical bills were covered through the foundation's emergency fund, allowing her to focus on recovery instead of financial stress. The relief was immediate and profound. Without the crushing weight of debt, she could actually heal. Her treatments became more effective when she wasn't constantly worried about bankruptcy and homelessness. But the real healing was emotional and spiritual. Mom started volunteering at the foundation's support groups for families dealing with medical crises. She discovered that helping others navigate the healthcare system gave her purpose beyond her own survival. Her experience with medical debt and insurance denials made her an effective advocate for others facing similar struggles. She became the kind of fierce, compassionate advocate she'd needed during her own darkest moments. The work was emotionally demanding, but deeply fulfilling, giving meaning to her suffering and transforming her pain into purpose. They were all grateful for Uncle Theo's safety net, but it took months to rebuild trust within the family. The cameras had revealed ugly truths about who they became under pressure. Dad had to confront his willingness to destroy family relationships for money. Mom had to face her paranoid stalking of relatives and her readiness to believe the worst about people she'd loved for decades. The healing process was slow and painful, like physical therapy after a serious injury. Family dinners resumed after almost a year, but they were different. Conversations focused on the foundation's work instead of personal grievances or financial anxieties. Everyone shared stories about the people they were helping, the lives being rebuilt, the dignity being restored. Uncle Theo's empty chair became a reminder of lessons learned rather than opportunities lost. His absence was felt differently now, not as the loss of a potential benefactor, but as the absence of someone who'd understood things about love and value that the rest of us were just beginning to learn. I kept Uncle Theo's letter in my wallet, a reminder that broken things, including families, can sometimes be fixed. But first, you have to stop making them worse. You have to acknowledge the damage and commit to repair work, even when it's harder than starting over with new people who don't know your history. The garage where Uncle Theo learned to repair discarded electronics became a workshop where homeless veterans learned job skills. Every day I watched people discover that broken doesn't mean worthless, just like Uncle Theo had learned as a kid, patiently soldering circuits while his family fought upstairs about money and status. The irony wasn't lost on me. Uncle Theo had used his fortune to teach us the same lesson he'd learned in poverty. That value isn't determined by price tags or bank balances. The homeless veterans rebuilding computers in grandmother's old garage had more dignity than we'd shown fighting over millions we'd never earned. He'd been right about us. When faced with $847 million, we'd shown our true selves, petty, greedy, willing to destroy relationships for personal gain. But he'd also been right about redemption. Some things are worth fixing, even when they seem beyond repair, especially then. The foundation grew beyond Uncle Theo's wildest dreams. Within 2 years, it was operating in 12 states, helping thousands of discarded people rebuild their lives. The tech company's sale funded scholarships for kids from broken homes, giving them opportunities Uncle Theo never had as a child fixing electronics in a dusty garage. The scholarship program became particularly close to my heart. These kids reminded me of Uncle Theo, brilliant and creative but overlooked by systems that valued conformity over innovation. Many came from families torn apart by addiction, poverty, or violence. The scholarships didn't just pay for college. They provided mentorship, counseling, and the kind of support structure Uncle Theo had never received. I often wondered if Uncle Theo had planned it this way from the beginning, if he knew the riddle would expose our greed but also create opportunities for redemption. Maybe he understood that some lessons can only be learned through failure, that some people need to lose everything before they can find what really matters. His personal journal, found after his death, revealed the depth of his planning. He'd spent 3 years designing the test, consulting with psychologists about human behavior under financial stress. He'd studied our family like a scientist, predicting our reactions with disturbing accuracy. The journal entries showed a man wrestling with his own cynicism, hoping to be proven wrong about human nature while preparing for the worst. He'd documented every family interaction for years, noting patterns of behavior that predicted how we'd respond to sudden wealth. But the final entry showed a different side. Broken things can be fixed. Discarded things can be treasured. Families can be healed, but only if someone chooses love over money, compassion over greed. I hope they make the right choice. I hope they prove me wrong about human nature. In the end, we did prove him wrong, just not how any of us expected. We proved that even the most broken people can be repaired, given enough time, patience, and willingness to do the hard work of rebuilding trust. The riddle was never about money. It was about discovering that some treasures can't be bought, sold, or inherited. They can only be earned through choosing what's right over what's profitable, even when the stakes are higher than you ever imagined. Uncle Theo's greatest fortune wasn't the $847 million he'd accumulated. It was the lesson he taught us about the value of discarded things, including discarded families willing to fight their way back to love. The mansion's transformation became a symbol of that lesson. Where Uncle Theo had once lived alone, surrounded by expensive things but starved for genuine connection, hundreds of people now gathered daily to rebuild their lives. The cold glass monument to individual success became a warm community center, celebrating collective healing. I started working full-time for the foundation, using my engineering background to expand the job training programs. Teaching homeless veterans to repair computers felt like honoring Uncle Theo's memory in a way that simply inheriting his money never could have. The work was harder than any job I'd ever had, but more rewarding than any paycheck. Every person who found housing, every addict who got clean, every veteran who learned new skills, they were all proof that Uncle Theo's vision was right. Discarded people weren't worthless. They just needed someone to see their potential instead of their problems. Sometimes former homeless clients would return to volunteer, helping newer arrivals navigate the system. Former addicts became peer counselors. Veterans who'd learned construction skills taught those same skills to younger men. The cycle of redemption Uncle Theo had envisioned was working exactly as he'd planned. The hardest part was explaining to outsiders why I'd given up $847 million. Friends, colleagues, even strangers who heard the story couldn't understand the decision. In their minds, I was either lying about the amount or had suffered some kind of mental breakdown that required professional intervention. You could have taken the money and still helped people, they'd argue. Think of all the good you could have done with that kind of wealth. But I'd seen what that money did to my family in just 30 days. I'd watched loving relationships turn toxic, watched decent people become paranoid and cruel, watched a lifetime of shared memories get incinerated in the furnace of greed. The money wasn't worth preserving if it meant becoming the kind of person Uncle Theo had spent his life avoiding. The foundation's success attracted national attention. News articles called it the billion-dollar lesson in human nature, and how one man's fortune exposed family greed. Documentary filmmakers wanted to tell the story. Publishers offered book deals that could have made me wealthy in my own right. I turned them all down. Uncle Theo's lesson wasn't meant to be entertainment or inspiration porn for people who'd never faced real moral tests. It was meant to be lived, practiced, embodied in daily choices to value people over profit. The real story was being written every day and the lives being rebuilt, the dignity being restored, the hope being rekindled. 3 years after Uncle Theo's death, I got a letter that changed everything. It came from a tech entrepreneur in Silicon Valley who'd read about the foundation online. He was terminally ill with the same cancer that killed Uncle Theo, and he wanted to create a similar foundation with his own fortune. I don't want to repeat your uncle's test, he wrote, but I want to create the same kind of lasting change. Could you help me design something that will outlive my body and heal instead of harm? That letter led to consulting work with other wealthy individuals planning their legacies. Uncle Theo's model became a template for philanthropy that prioritized character over connections, need over networking, healing over ego enhancement. Each new foundation felt like extending Uncle Theo's reach, multiplying his impact beyond what any single fortune could achieve. The riddle that had tested our family's character became a methodology for testing society's values, for identifying and supporting the kind of people who choose compassion over comfort. The work brought me into contact with other families torn apart by wealth and inheritance disputes. I saw the same patterns Uncle Theo had documented in us, the way money poisoned relationships, the way desperate people justified increasingly terrible behavior, the way greed transformed loving families into battlefields. But I also saw redemption stories. Families who chose to work together instead of competing. Wealthy individuals who used their fortunes to heal rather than divide. Children who inherited not just money but values. Who understood that privilege came with responsibility. Years later, when Dad's restaurant was featured in a magazine as a model for community-oriented business, the journalist asked what he'd learned from the whole experience. My brother-in-law taught me that broken things can be fixed, Dad said, but only if you stop trying to profit from the damage. That quote became the unofficial motto of everything we built from the wreckage of our greed. Uncle Theo had been right about human nature, but he'd also been right about human potential. We were capable of both tremendous destruction and remarkable redemption, sometimes in the same 30-day period. The foundation's impact grew in ways Uncle Theo probably never imagined. The homeless veterans who learned computer repair skills went on to start their own businesses. Former addicts became addiction counselors, using their experience to help others climb out of the same holes they'd fallen into. Single mothers who earned their GEDs became teachers, lawyers, social workers. The ripple effects spread through entire communities. Crime rates dropped in neighborhoods around our centers. Employment rose. Children who'd grown up in unstable homes found stability through our after-school programs. Families torn apart by addiction and poverty began to heal. Uncle Theo's $847 million had been transformed into something much larger, a network of hope that touched thousands of lives and created value that couldn't be measured in dollars. But the foundation's greatest success was more personal. 5 years after Uncle Theo's death, our family gathered for Christmas dinner at the mansion-turned-community center. It was the first time we'd all been together since that devastating day when I'd revealed the truth about his will. The gathering was different from the formal, tense affairs of my childhood. Kids from the community center's after-school program joined us, their laughter echoing through rooms that had once been sterile and silent. Homeless veterans shared stories with my cousins. Former addicts taught my little sister card games. Mom brought Uncle Theo's childhood photo, the one showing him with his repaired radio. She placed it on the main table, surrounded by flowers that had been grown in the mansion's new community garden. He would have loved this, she said, tears in her eyes. All these people finding family in the place where he felt so alone. Dad raised his glass for a toast. To Uncle Theo. He taught us that some riddles can only be solved with your heart. Brett, sober for 2 years and remarried to a social worker he'd met at the foundation, added, and that broken things are worth fixing. especially families. As I looked around the table, at relatives who'd found redemption through service, at strangers who'd become family through shared struggle, at children who'd never known the Uncle Theo I remembered, I realized he'd gotten his wish after all. He'd wanted someone to prove him wrong about human nature. He'd wanted evidence that broken things could be fixed, that discarded people had value, that families could choose love over money even when the stakes were impossibly high. He'd been wrong about us being irredeemable, but he'd been right about everything else. The riddle was solved, but the real work was just beginning. Uncle Theo's fortune had become the seed money for something much larger, a movement that valued discarded people, a community that saw potential in broken things, a family that had learned to choose love over money even when the stakes were higher than we'd ever imagined. His greatest achievement wasn't making $847 million. It was teaching us that some fortunes can't be measured in dollars, some riddles can't be solved with intelligence alone, and some families can't be saved by anything except the courage to choose what's right over what's profitable. The answer to Uncle Theo's riddle was never hidden in grandmother's garage. It was hidden in our hearts, waiting for us to remember that broken things, including broken people, deserve second chances, third chances, as many chances as it takes to make them whole again. 10 years later, I still carry his letter in my wallet. The paper is worn now, the ink faded, but the message remains clear. Look where the forgotten gather, and you'll find what matters most. Uncle Theo had been talking about more than homeless shelters and addiction centers. He'd been talking about the forgotten parts of ourselves, the capacity for compassion that greed had obscured, the ability to love without conditions that desperation had buried, the wisdom to see value in what others discarded. The riddle wasn't just a test of our character. It was a map back to our humanity, a guide to becoming the kind of people grandmother had tried to raise, the kind of family Uncle Theo had always hoped we could be. In the end, he gave us something worth more than $847 million. He gave us a chance to discover that the greatest fortunes can't be inherited. They can only be earned through the daily choice to love more than we take, to heal more than we harm, to build bridges instead of walls. The riddle was solved. The real treasure was found. And Uncle Theo, wherever he was, had finally been proven wrong about the one thing that mattered most, that his family was beyond redemption. We weren't. We just needed someone who loved us enough to show us the way home.